right, everybody, welcome to Sonic Dorms. I'm your host, Max Davala, of course, and a warm welcome to my very special guest here today, Emmett Lee Stang, who's joining me for a conversation in the Sonic Dorm. Emmett, thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me, brother. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you for doing this. I think you are truly one of the best singers I've heard in a long time, and I'm always keeping my ear to the ground. I don't go by charts. I just go by my ears. I'm always exploring, Bandcamp, Spotify, Apple Music. Where is that next big artist who's got the goods, you know?
Mm,
So
right on.
yeah, and I remember probably about maybe a year or two now, I came across a song called Unwanted by
Mm.
a band called The Effect. And I said, who is singing this? What is this? This is great. Great hook and the vocals and everything just sounded super pristine and I couldn't get enough of it. So
Oh man,
that basically was what opened the door, so to speak, for me and what it is that you're doing now. So
cool. Yeah, that was a pretty cool time. Uh, that came about. The effect was kind of an unusual beginning to that group because I was gigging a lot here in Vegas where I'm living now, and I was actually like a utility guy, not a lead singer. Uh, just in the Vegas scene, I was doing like a lot of the extra stuff. Since I'm a studio brat, I grew up, playing classical music and being in the studio all the time. I was hired for this cover group as a like a keyboardist and a guitar player and backup singer. And every once in a while, I would sing lead. And I thought, well, I have to work on my output, my visual output in terms of being like a lead singer because I obviously have been since for a long time, but people don't see it, they don't know it, they don't know it exists, right? So I thought, well, I started jumping on the whole something I thought I'd never do, by the way. I thought, well, I'll just start doing covers, online and like on all the social media platforms and what have you. And so it was right around that time, back to the effect, I had decided to do sometimes I would try to do like a straight cover. If I did Zeppelin, I felt I had to do it exactly like Zeppelin or as close to, right? Because it's hard to mess with Zeppelin in my view. And I was thinking about how Chris Cornell in particular had been able to take songs from other people and really make them his own. And kind of in a copycat scenario, I was like, well, what if uh, that beautiful song by Peter Gabriel, In Your Eyes, was stripped down and played acoustically in a way that I imagined Cornell would have done it. That was the inspiration behind that. And for some reason, that went like wildfire through social media, and that got to Trev Lukather. He saw that on his feed, and that actually was his wedding song of that year with him and his wife. That was their wedding tune. So I guess it was on his feed, or the algorithm said, "Hey." And after a bit, he contacted me, and that the effect he had other people in mind, I think, but in terms of getting a singer, I think that's what kind of sparked his imagination.
that's incredible. So again, it was very almost like a serendipitous kind of moment, right?
Absolutely. And I don't think I had a lot of faith in social media. And I think still my faith it kind of oscillates because you hit something and then it's dead and what have you. Certain platforms I think are pretty consistent, like YouTube, actually, I think is a place where, music videos reign and, people want to watch long form. But like a lot of the other social medias that have um, everything's 15 seconds, and I became a slave to that too, in a certain degree. I thought, well, you want to stick out, you're trying to promote yourself. Although I don't believe that uh, little snippets uh, can really necessarily promote you. I think a lot of times, just like I remember Vine back in the day, I was like a Vine star
Hmm.
for 2 seconds or whatever it was, and there were a lot of people that were getting hired to be on films as actors that were Vine stars, and some of their careers didn't take off because they really didn't. They only did 5-second videos, and but you can't blame producers for trying to look at, okay, where are the numbers? What's happening now in the industry that's kind of able to trim the fat and get us closer to who's the talent. But I think in a similar way now, like with Instagram or what have you, and like I said, I'm guilty of it too. It's like you get into a habit of oh, I just want to get people's attention, which doesn't necessarily build a career, but it's something that you kind of have to do. And it's just a matter of to what degree.
Yeah, and and that's I think something that even for myself, like now I'm going, short, concise, but pack it with as much quality and as much of you as you can. So
Hmm.
kind of try to maintain some kind of balance, a little bit of the best of both worlds, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but and then there's the other side of me, the more the maverick in me is like, no, to hell with it. If it needs to be 5 minutes, it needs to be 5 minutes. But as long
Right.
as you can make it work,
Hmm.
because maybe you can be the trailblazer that'll change people's opinions on whether things should be 2 seconds or 20. I don't know. Just saying.
Well, it's an interesting idea, at least
Yeah.
in as much as I think when um, people really uh, kind of really kick or really resonate with an audience, and I've seen this actually with some people I went to acting school with that blew up over COVID. They stick to their guns and they do what they want. And I'm a big believer in that. And I find that things tend to work for me in a similar way, even if I haven't reached the same kind of, exposure that some of my friends have had. The the sauce is, as you said, it's kind of like you got to follow your heart, and that is really what clicks. So, like I said, being guilty of sometimes chasing the algorithm, and it's just it's not going to happen. As you're doing it, you're like, well, or sometimes you're like, I've got to release something. It's been 2 weeks or whatever, so you get that pressure of, all right, well, let me do something this week, and hopefully it's inspired.
You brought up something that we're definitely going to talk about. Upon doing my research, I realized, wow, Emmett is an actor. It seems, I think Emmett, first and foremost, is an actor. From the impression I got, correct me if I'm wrong, began as an actor. So one of the things I like to do with first-time guests is talk about the origin story. So for you, where did it all begin, and where did that lead you into the world of music, really?
Well, it's interesting that, and you wouldn't be wrong because I think the internet says that I'm an actor first, and the internet doesn't know everything
No.
because that's like, as they say, it's to be an overnight success, it takes, 10, 20 years. But I started as a musician when I was three and a half. I started with classical violin. That was my beginning. So I grew up playing everything. I was a little wunderkind. I started with violin, like I said, three and a half, drums at 5, piano at 7, guitar at 11, and then I was really shy about singing, and my dad was one of the chief, influences to be like, Emmett, start singing, sing, sing, sing. You got to sing. And so I think I was, very tentative. Even though I'm not shy on stage, I've never been shy ever, even since I was 5. But to sing, that was another thing. And but that came a little later, and I think that took time for the voice to kind of develop, or to be able to do things that I could hear. Um, and I got a lot of training when I was young, youngish, well, very young for a singer, around 15, 16. I started with I guess what you would say, the vocal guru out of New York, Katie Agresta, and she gave me the confidence to just stick with it because the voice at that age for a male is just it's going, all over the place. She's like, you got to wait, you got to keep training, but you can do it, and whatever you hear, you'll be able to sing. And if it weren't for her, I think I might have, I don't know, I'll just play guitar or something. Because I was that kid. I went to a prep school in Philly during, um, well, I'll back up. I was born in England, um, not to English parents, because my dad, he worked all over the place. My mom is Dutch. My sister was born in Argentina 2 years before me. Basically, I didn't remember England because I was like 9 months when we left. Went to Canada. We lived there for about 7 years or so, and then we moved to Philly. Was really where I say I'm from. When people ask, "Well, where are you from?" I'm like, "Well, it's a long story, but if I had to say anything, Philly's the place I've been the longest." But I was going to a prep school in Philly from like whenever we had moved. So I was going into third or fourth grade up until about high school, and I was always trying to find ways of um, like, who am I? I think it's obviously a question everybody's asking themselves since they're little. And for me, school really brought that out because I was happy at home. If I remember like my early memories, things were cool. I have a good family, good relationship with my parents and my sister. and we're a tight group. And so it's at school when I was like, oh my, what do I do? What do I do with this thing, whatever this is, this, you know? And so for me, it was immediately like entertaining. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, teachers in the past. That was my way of being comfortable with myself and sticking my ego out and feeling like, you know, I was somebody. But it basically, anytime, because I just started developing musically, if there was ever like a talent show or anything like that, it was always like, all right, I'm playing Eruption, you know, because Eddie Van Halen was one of my first heroes as a guitar player. So I learned, you know, how to tap and stuff, and so that's the thing that I'd be doing. And even though I came from a classical background, which really helped me, I would say, you know, I mean, given those instruments that I listed and kind of my early training, my parents were like, train, you know, have that background. So I was really like very disciplined. I would say even like my dad would, he has stories of me observing me when I was little. We're talking three and a half, and just like learning the violin. And he said you could. I could tell that you were able to stand there for hours and concentrate, even as a little kid. Which he thought, huh, that's interesting because sometimes, I mean, I was rambunctious too. I guess if I liked something, I could focus. You know, that was the thing. And I was writing tunes by 11, you know, shit songs, like just writing tunes on a guitar and, but dreaming of like, oh man, talking about influences, you know, even though there's a lot of classical training, my folks, you know, from that generation, I was listening to everything, you know, so I grew up on the Beatles. So I found I had Beatlemania when probably at the same age that my dad had it back when he was in fourth grade. I had it listening to Elvis and James Brown and Little Richard and the Stones and then psychedelic rock. I remember the day to this day. I still remember when my dad, I was around 5. And I think we were going to hockey practice at the time. We were still in Canada. And he's like, okay, you got to listen to something. This is an important moment. And he dropped Zeppelin 1 in the car. And life was changed forever. I was like, oh, what is this? My little brain was loving it, but couldn't even define it, you know? So basically, I grew up hearing everything, Ravi Shankar to flamenco to, you know, Mozart to, you know, my loves in rock and roll, early rock and roll, psychedelic rock, a lot of British invasion music. Cream, I was nuts about Cream, still am. Hendrix, huge influence actually. And a lot of Free Spirits, The Doors, you know, Morrison. So it's interesting as well, though Thriller would be playing at home. So I got a lot of like early R&B and, you know, even before that, like Motown and just everything. It's like just getting hit with all these wonderful sounds. I think my first memory of music is actually hearing The Police. That's the very first like rock band that I can remember. I think we were still in Toronto. I remember in our front room, I was like 2. I remember hearing Young Teacher, the Subject. I was like, what? I was like, God damn, what is that? So, you know, takes a minute for you to find your own thing. I think when you've had so many influences, like when people say, what's your favorite singer? I'm like, whoo, you got a minute, you know?
Where do I begin? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. So even though you were, you know, a lot of this music was maybe at this point, what, 20, 30 years old, 20 years old, maybe, let's just say.
Mhm.
And you were listening to the stuff from before, but you were listening to it almost as if it were current,
Yeah.
which is funny because so like you said, you were, you know, listening to the Beatles at the same age your dad was.
Mhm.
It's funny because like I when I was growing up, I mean it was like you know, I'm a 90s kid, so like growing up, whatever was on the radio, I almost didn't have any sort of I didn't really care. Like I was listening to stuff that was already at that point 10, 20, 30 years old. And
Mhm.
in my mind, I interpreted it almost as if it was new music. I was like, oh yeah, this is a new like the Police, funny enough, Zenyatta Mandata is the record. That was my first Police record too. I remember the first time I
Cool.
heard the opening track is Don't Stand So Close to Me. And
Yeah.
I didn't think of it as if it was an old song from 1980. I was like, oh, this is a song from, I don't know, 1995, 96, whatever the year was. You know, so
Yeah.
it's funny. So it wasn't until later that you start to go, oh, this is a little older, you know?
Totally.
I
Totally.
mean, so,
There's a power to there's a timeless quality in all the great music like you
yeah.
just described. You thought, well, this is current, this is happening. And I think there's it's interesting when different songwriters are asked like where does melody come from? Like where do songs come from? And they all kind of say something similar. And I've definitely found when I think about that, or when I explore or observe, like where does this come from? Where does that come from? When you don't know, but it's just this abstract thing that happens where you start to kind of hear it in your head. You kind of wonder, like, well, the songs already exist, because I'm a big believer that they do, and that it's not you that necessarily is writing it, it's you that's discovering it. Almost like it's was it Michelangelo, the Renaissance artist, talked about, I don't I don't create it. I take a piece of stone and I reveal it. I chisel to find what the art is. And I think there's something to be said for music being similar. And so I think with, if Sting, God, he wrote so many amazing tunes, but like when he would write one of these hits, um, without speaking for him, it seems like that if he's really writing something that resonates with people, rather than being just just a fad or a trend, like when it really hits hard, and it can be a simple song, it doesn't really matter what it is, but if it affects people, and it affects people in different generations, um, then he's kind of finding something that's universal. And so that music will live on, I think. This is like Mozart, Bach, we're still listening to these cats. Maybe it's a niche crowd, but there's a reason why we're listening to Beethoven. And there's certain music that will take a lot for it to be forgotten, just because it's something it's hitting us, and it's whether the different generations come and go, and social trends and stuff. It's like, well, good music's good music. And that's what I learned hearing all these styles that I describe. It's like Gypsy King's got it. It's like
Hmm.
Janis Joplin, she's got it. There's that thing, it's undeniable.
Do you think that gave you an advantage over a lot of people, just in the fact that you don't listen to music thinking, well, this was a one-hit wonder. This charted on the Billboard 200. You're just listening to music as is, as for what it is. And I
Mm.
think that's me. I try not to be a snob. I go, that's what music's there for. It's not about, sure, you got to have a hit to make money and whatnot, but at the end of the day, music is a limitless, universal. Sorry to sound like a hippie, but that's just the way I view it. Like to me, it's you should. I cherish people like yourself who go, yeah, you just listen to the music for what it is. It isn't about, And so, did that make you also feel like an anomaly, like in your, I don't know, in your age group, like the fact that you were pulling from all these other artists from before your time, while everybody else was listening to whatever was current?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. To the point where I had a snob streak. I think I've gotten over that,
Hmm.
as I age. But I didn't reject all new music, because we'd have the radio on when mom would have to drive us all over Hell's Half Acre to school, to lessons, this and that, sports. So the radio was on all the time. It wasn't just like listening to the 50s radio, like the doo-wop stations. We were listening to modern stuff. So when Smash Mouth came out, I was like, damn, what's that? But there was, I think, from time to time, music that I was like, nah, that sucks, or what is that? Like, oh, it's not, it's like they can't touch Zeppelin 2. I had that thinking for a bit. Probably took a while for me to get over that. But like, I think I didn't really get, in a big way, bands that were coming out. Like I remember when Limp Bizkit came out, and I was like, okay, like I got what was happening with it, but it took me a bit of time to look back and be like, no, they figured something out. Or, like Coldplay as well. It's like Chris Martin's written like so many beautiful tunes, but at the time when they just hit, I was an angry young rock and roller. So it was like, well, it's not heavy, it's not dazed and confused or whatever. And so there, I think it's very much a sign of youth to reject things in general. Sometimes it's the opposite, like they're like rejecting the older generations. But I guess because I grew up with and cherished that older music, um, and I could feel that there was a kind of simplicity in modern music as well, which I was probably reacting to, and but I think over time, like I said, you start to appreciate everything when it does strike a chord with people. It's doing it for a reason. And I think the more you can appreciate what, even if you can't completely articulate it, it does you a lot of good to always find something in every act or musician, even if they're not a made musician. You see a musician on the street and you go, Oh, there's a beautiful way that he's playing his guitar, whereas people may not be noticing it, but I think being open and appreciative is it's just a good way to live.
No, yeah, well said. I mean, to me, that's what's so fascinating. Like I mentioned, it's the fact that music can be or is actually a universal thing. And much like with food, we all have our taste, it's
Yeah.
so I think, but I think it's nice to have people who can talk about it and appreciate it as such. So I think that's a wonderful thing, wonderful quality to have too. So,
Yeah.
where does that, so now going to that to you finally getting into this zone of like, I need to make it. When does that go into effect? Pardon the pun.
Right. Yeah, that really, I think I always had that since I was a kid. I remember my mom was wondering what to do with me and my sister. And to give you an idea, at home I was very quiet. And at school I wasn't, like I was trying to describe there. And but it was so bad that sometimes the principal would call my mom in to be like, got to talk to you about your kid, your son. She's like, what? It's like the death wish for a mother to hear this when, the kids are preteen or whatever. Like you're just starting out. And usually it was a complaint, like he's not like rude or mean or doing anything like bad. It's just he doesn't shut up. Like he's entertaining his classmates. He's the funny guy. He's doing this, he's doing that. And I think I felt from a very young age, I was very precocious in as much as I could talk to adults when I was little. I didn't mind it. Like there's that you probably remember. There was definitely like two camps when you're preteens. It's like, well, it's the adults, like they're boring or whatever. But I felt like a little bit of like an ambassador to the adult world, if I can call it that. I could hang with my friends, but then sometimes I'd have a great conversation with, the teacher, whoever. And I kind of felt it. I wasn't sure that I was excelling in anything. I was a good student. I mean, and I didn't really find the killer instinct for sports until later. But it wasn't something that I didn't train a lot. I wasn't dedicated like the kids that were going to get scholarships for what have you. I wasn't doing that. I was still, you know, trying to figure out what Jimmy Page was playing, So, but I knew at school, I was like, because of that social atmosphere of like survival and like, who am I? And having tastes of being on stage, like at early plays, like probably the first thing I remember is what is it? It's some obscure, it's like a very kind of like medieval story, which was adapted as like a children's play, Bartholomew and the Thousand Hats or something. If I get that title right, I don't remember. But I remember I wasn't even a main player in it. I said because we didn't have a thousand hats. There's something about the tale where he's trying to find his lady love and he has to leave clues where he's been and his hat is able to regenerate itself or something. I don't remember the fairy tale, but essentially we didn't have the budget for a thousand hats, so I had to pick up the hat and put it back on the kid playing the role. But of course, I just didn't do that. I turned my thing into a role. Probably then I like uh the moment that we had a crowd, I figured it out. I was like, oh, I'll be this little whatever, I'll turn it into a thing. So I already had the bug as soon as I was in front of people. And even like in a small setting, which was again surprising for my folks because I'd be kind of quiet and well behaved at home. As soon as there was like more than five people, it was like Emmett Wolfson wants to do impressions. He wants to dance. One of the earliest memories, I think, my of me when we were being babysat by our close friends in Toronto was Bad was playing from MJ. I started dancing. And James was like, where did that come from? And I don't know. I just listen to that. It sounds good. You want to move to it. So there were these little clues, and certainly for me, I remember finding a kind of solace in being able to wear a mask, which at first maybe it starts that way, performing, but then all of a sudden you're like, but it feels good. So is it a mask or am I just finding something that I resonate with that just doesn't come out unless there's a bunch of people. So this little idea, and then finding out as a kid, like seeing clips of like the Ed Sullivan Show, like the Beatles, or the Tammy Show is probably one of my favorites. James Brown, 1964. And you see performing, and you're like, God damn, this like is so electric. Never mind the screaming that's going on. And as a little kid, you're so impressionable, and you're like, I want to do that. What is that electricity? I want to get into that. And so without like chasing the idea of making it, it was definitely something that was on my mind from a very young age. I thought, no, no. And the more I did it, I was like, I have to be entertaining people. That's my lot in life. Some people are magistrates, they're lawyers, they're critics, but I'm like, I'm a ham.
Where does that's interesting too, that, and I find I see a lot of that in many artists. I mean, there's a few that are always on,
Yeah,
but most of them I find the majority have this, there's this dichotomy that takes place where they're equally this reserved, shy, ironically, um, like, I don't know, reclusive, introverted type.
yeah.
And then suddenly you put the spotlight on them, and this whole other character comes out that you would have never, ever like pinpointed them to be as such. And I find it incredibly fascinating
Mm,
how there's this shift, and it's just a reaction from something like you said with the music. You listening to MJ, Bad, all of a sudden it's like boom, it's like something just clicks, you know?
yeah.
So is that how it is for you? It just it's almost unexplainable. It just is. It's just something, some kind of chemical reaction to the spotlight, the people, the music.
Amen to that. I absolutely. It's like a electric shock and off you go. And you talk about that dichotomy. It's very true. And I observe that in myself. There are times where I'm more, sociably agreeable, or, I'm able to to deal with the room, where I'm not just looking at my shoelaces. But there's a lot of, I think, I can remember a lot, and I still have this. You talked about being shy. Um, Part of what's, I think, when people get to know me, um, they sometimes are surprised uh, because I'm, quiet or kind of zen or what have you, or whatever words they use to describe me off stage, and and then on stage, as you said, it's like the light switch is clicked on. I've heard a term that you get let out of jail. I think that's Paul McCartney describing Hendrix, which is a beauty. And it's a curious thing, but I wonder. So that's very loud. Jeez. Okay, man, go away. Goodbye. So I wonder what uh kind of what that is, or if it's there's something in order to bring a lot of energy that you have to uh contain it otherwise. And it's not all perform I'm sure, and there are performers I know that are, like you say, they're more on a lot. And I wonder how they do it, because I get a lot of, like I've said, like a lot of the little anecdotes. It's like I'm observing things, whether it's, hearing the police for the first time or watching James Brown, be like, oh my God, what's happening here? I love this. Whatever it is that strikes you, you absorb it. And so I think part of the nature of being able to perform in a really explosive way is, again, not in every case, but certainly for me, is being quiet and letting it kind of get into the works. Like I'm able to soak it up like a sponge. I think otherwise I wouldn't be able to do that as well. Even when lyrics come or melodies come, that's a very quiet, um, meditative almost state that you're in. In fact, I meditate quite a bit. Have done for, I don't know, not quite a decade, but and I notice sometimes when you're meditating, even though you're not there to write songs, but sometimes when you're really quiet and you're trying to not think of anything at all and just kind of be, sometimes you hear something really beautiful. And you're like, "Ooh, what is that?" And it may take a second for you to like articulate, "Oh, da, 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 da." Okay, I have it. But at first, you get hit by this wash of something. And so, in every respect, creativity is real seems to come when um, you're quiet. Repeating myself, but like even acting as well, sometimes you get ideas for characters when you're just in your imagination and you're still not doing anything. You could be doing something, but I find tend to be pretty objective is the way in. And again, like I said, maybe it's just that's what it is required for you to conserve your energy. Is it an instinct, I don't know, in the performer to wait? Not in all cases. It's curious.
Do you use the same application that you do to your acting ability to music or to creating songs and to, finding your voice within a song? Is it the same kind of structure, the same kind of process?
I think so. Yeah, I was like I said, always an impressionist, and so unfortunately for my poor teachers, sometimes that meant me doing them in class, woo, while they were speaking. Like if they asked me a question, I had one math guy in seventh grade who sounded a lot like Christopher Walken.
Oh,
So I had a field day, but he didn't know. That's the funny thing is some people don't necessarily know when you're doing them, and but the kids were like, trying not to lose it, and that was terrible. But I was bored, if I have any defense. But in terms of like you say, the different crafts, they work similarly, I think, for sure. And so, like I said, even though I was kind of doing acting like things, I didn't gravitate towards it until a little bit later. I think my sister got me into doing some kind of improv class when I was almost 20. It took a minute. I mean, again, I was always that kid that enjoyed, doing what do we call it? Drama class, back at school. And so, if we got to do an improvisation exercise and I could do some stupid character with, or whatever, but and I would really take to it. But the process, I don't think I thought of it because I was so immersed in music and studying it, as well as trying to write tunes, like I said, when I was starting in my teens. I'm like, oh, that's the thing I want to be. I want to be this. I want to be this. Um, it was actually not until I discovered Shakespeare that I got the idea like, ooh, this is like, not that it's not a craft, but I didn't see it that way. I don't think I really appreciated it until, and then I appreciate everything since then, from daytime drama. And I've been on some of those shows, so I know everything's a craft. But I think for me, being the little snob that I was, iambic pentameter and Hamlet, and it's like, oh my God, this beautiful, rich, it's musical dialogue, and it's like that was definitely the way in for me. But I think after, when I did take a real effort to understand acting, um, it was very similar. I think I felt when I first did it, I was like, there's a part of my brain that has to be more not narrow, but it's like there are parameters that I don't experience in music. I think at first that's probably why I didn't take to it because music is like, and certainly performing it, there are no, I don't feel any kind of lines of division, none. It's just, and the more you do it, the more you practice, you're able to do those things. It's like the 10,000 hours of finding your ingredients
hmm.
is very valid. It doesn't mean that you have to do that to come up with things. I don't mean that. Sometimes something can hit you. You don't know where it comes from, but doing it a lot and focusing on anything and doing it a lot, it gives you that freedom to do what you want. And maybe it's like you're building up your subconscious or your foundation mentally. I don't know what it is, but certainly. But I found that there, with acting, even if it's improv, you have a character, you have a setting, you have a situation, you have freedom within that. Um, but I can see why it didn't strike me as much as music did. But when I found how beautiful it is to actually feel like someone else and to maybe even speak differently, which is what I thought was really fun about acting, character acting, even if it was subtle, like how would this guy pick his phone up? Well, he's not just gonna do it like I do. I mean, maybe he does, but that question of who is this person, that's what made it interesting for me.
Do you go that in depth with your process? It's even thinking about something as minute as how would this character pick up this phone from this table? That's pretty grand. I mean, um, I'm doing a not to get off track here, but
Oh,
really
go for
quick, I'm writing a paper, let's just say, about acting about an actor right now.
it.
Not an actor in particular, but the acting method acting in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and the lengths that somebody will go on to demonstrate that they are that character.
Yeah.
So I find that incredibly, I'm a big film fanatic, by the way, but I find that incredibly fascinating. The lengths that someone like a Gary Oldman back in the day, or would go towards embracing this character on and off set. And where do you limit yourself? Where do you draw the line? I'll stop there. But yeah.
No, that's a yeah, I see why you're fascinated with. I still have that as well. And I talked a lot of shit as a young actor about method acting because I found originally um it kind of the use of imagination in general. And I know that it's so subjective because they could be doing the exact same thing. But from what I heard teachers tell me what method was, and again, like I say, the 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 lines of articulating it, it could because they could be doing the exact same thing I thought I was doing. But when you're a little kid and you imagine something, you're like, I'm a knight, and you're a knight, and off you go. To me, that was acting. And so actually, I kind of got worse when I went to acting school and I was told what techniques were. My acting suffered because I was like thinking about, well, I just, I do this guy. I've got an English accent, and it's like an RP accent. He comes from a certain, levels. He has a status or he has a class in his voice. He's not an East Londoner, and he moves like this. He does like all those things to me were instinctive, and then they started breaking them down, and that screwed me up. But funny, like I said, the irony of talking shit about anything, you end up kind of finding out what's beautiful about it. Because I remember when I started doing more theater work and getting a little bit more experience on camera, I found that trying to immerse myself as much as possible helped. And then like I'd hear stories of Daniel Day-Lewis, like, oh, he can't do the same take. He can't do from take to take the exact same way. And I know I'm like, well, that's murder for the editor. I've been on that side of production too. So, so I'd be talking a lot of flack. And then when I would do it, like as I got more comfortable, I found I can't do it the same way each time either. Oops, sorry. Like, and then I realized, oh, okay. So you talk a lot of guff until you do it and you realize, yeah, that may be an editing nightmare, but to do something exactly the same way, that's it's almost disingenuous to someone like me. And so that's kind of what helped me go back into music. Doing a lot of kind of TV work in Canada. I moved to Vancouver. I'd been out in LA for like almost 10 years and did doing music, trying to do a few original bands. And you have to do everything in LA, at least at the time when I was there. And so and you figure out, well, I need some cash here. So I guess I'll figure out how to DP. I'll figure out how to do post-production and color grading. And I was working with my sister, actually. We had a little production company and we did a lot of like short films for other people, for ourselves. And you end up having to do tons of things. But the there was a kind of a point where it was like, well, we've been here long enough, and we heard that if you had you're dual citizens, we're triple. I think Jenny's four. I don't know how she can have four, but she has four technically. I just have three. And we heard that in Vancouver, where everything was happening, if you had American citizenship, Canadian citizenship, you may get a chance to work a little bit more, and it did help me for sure. But it was kind of when that was winding down. We're rolling now to like COVID, right
Mhm.
before I moved back to Vegas. One thing I noticed was I started slacking a little bit in auditions uh, because I started to really want to feel it, really wanted to make it feel real. And sometimes when I would critique the writing too much, because I've also written scripts, I've done dialogue, I love dialogue. Again, being a snob does you no favors, and in my case, for sure. So I would sometimes maybe judge the writing a little bit, or just be like, man, that's not natural. That's not what someone says. And so like little things like that, when it would steer away from what I felt was reality, that was like kind of a sign like, okay, it's not either write your own film or you got to think about what you're doing with yourself. And I was like, well, yeah, maybe I gotta go back fully into music. I never quite left it. Like even when I was working at a liquor store in Vancouver just to make ends meet, I would sing for people. I mean, I'm terrible. Like I got a crowd. I'm like, what do you like? You like R&B? Get tips. And
Yeah,
it was never far away.
that's pretty cool. But it goes to show, like, it's almost like the universe was telling you, like, this is where you, not to take away from the other thing, but this is where you belong. You know, it goes back to the heart of the matter, right?
Exactly.
So for you, it was music, and I feel like the COVID thing happening, I think for a lot of people can attest to this. It was almost like let me think about what I really want. What do I really want to do? So for those that have been kind of like in this limbo zone, for a little bit. Maybe we're trying to figure it out. That was like the moment to figure it out, like, or to have something snap into place. And it sounds to me like that was like the moment where you're like, no, I gotta go back to music, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
talk about the timing of that. Buddy of mine who I've known for over 20 years, he was always in my original bands when I was a kid, when I was like 17. He's been playing with me forever. Kevin Vecchione, amazing bassist. He's played with everyone and he's a real freak, amazing singer. Um, it was right around that time, like you said, when that's a beautiful way of putting it, like when people thought about, okay, what am I really doing with myself? What do I want? What do I love? He contacted me out of the blue. We'd been, talking from time to time, of course, throughout the years, but it was right around that time when I was finding like, oh, I think I'm kind of shine's wearing off a little bit with chasing TV and film, perhaps. And uh, he he just found my channel that I think it was on YouTube. I had like, 5 subscribers or whatever it was at the time. I was just doing it just to do it. I was like, well, it's good for me. It feels good. And I think he found it and he's like, oh, wow, you're doing this again. And it's been a long time, I think, since he heard me sing. And so that had developed a bit. But essentially, he was talking about what he was doing in Vegas. He had been here for some years already at that time. And he said, you got to think about, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for you. And one thing led to the next. And I think I visited him. It's funny, and every once in a while I have this where I have this feeling, and it's a nondescript, like, oh, I think this may happen. Before I even talked to him, I think it was that January. I was like, I was watching a lot of poker. Okay, that was something I was getting into during COVID. And I was like, not for the reason of playing poker, but I was like, I think I got to go to Vegas. And I don't know why. It was a weird thing. My parents had lived there before and had moved since, and I'd been there from time to time when I was going to acting school. I'd visit them. So I really dug it, and thought it was a cool place. But there was something, it just hit me. I was like living in Canada, and actually I was at my folks' place at the time. I just left my apartment during COVID since there was no income happening. And I was like, I think I gotta be like in that part of the world. I gotta go back to the States. I gotta go to Vegas. I don't know why. And within months, like I said, my buddy Kev, he uh he sent me a message and he was just saying, oh, cool, look what you're doing. But one thing led to the next. I visited and then I was like, yeah, I gotta get back. It doesn't matter. It didn't even matter what I do, I just have to earn as a musician. And that helped a lot. Really did.
Gotcha. Is that what led to then going back to earlier in the conversation to the effect and that whole project taking place?
Yes. And interestingly, as soon as I landed and I moved really fast. I remember like I visited in July and by August I had moved. It's like, oh yeah, I know what to do. Okay. And it was really interesting. Before Trev found me, um, the guy who I talk about, kind of like my rock and roll mentor, um, I, I was working TikTok. I think one of my exes was like, you got to get on that. I was like, babe, it's not that easy. She's like, no, 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 you're gonna get a lot of followers, whatever. And so I started a TikTok uh, page, and I was like, well, I'm just kind of getting into this, whatever. I'll just post, having no faith in any of these things, really, I must say. And but I remember like I had just moved to Vegas, and I had maybe done stuff for like half a year on TikTok or whatever. And then I see this message from Steve Stevens. I was like, nah, internet, you don't know who's pulling your leg. Like, who knows? Like, yeah, sure. Then I remember talking to my buddy Kev again. I was like, dude, Steve Stevens like just reached out on TikTok. I was like, it can't be him, right? And he's like, no, that's him. I was like, you kidding me? But then Steve added me everywhere, on all the platforms, just to be like, no, no, it's me and it's official. And so right away, I was starting to, have coffee with Steve and finding a kindred spirit as well as a mentor, like I say, like I was barely here a month. I don't think I even started my gig with the cover band yet. And he was like, dude, like, what are you doing and where do you come from? And, what's this all about? But the funny thing is that we found immediately uh, this camaraderie, because it was like we were both 17 talking about Hendrix and Zeppelin. And he's like that, you know, as a person. It's unbelievable when you see someone who's had this amazing career and who's a freak musician. Because I've toured with him, thanks to him, the effect. We toured with Billy Idol on a throughout the States. We did like a couple weeks with them. Because every night the guy's killing it, and he never does anything twice the same way. It's like it's beautiful. He's like a pure musician. But when you hang with him, you're talking with him, he's just excited about the music he loves. He never talks about himself. There may be the odd, like, oh, there was this great story back when we were doing Rebel Yell or something. You can get it out of him. It's not his go-to. And I found that we had really, I must say, like our fairy godmothers, three Steves, Steve Stevens, Steve Perry was happy to meet, delighted, and Steve Lukather, and all these guys. It's amazing to see the dudes that really had and have incredible careers that came up and are legends. They're all really great people. Like, they've been through a lot of stuff, but they don't have ego. Like they perform, but they have interests, and they're usually interested in other things besides themselves. They never talk about work, don't talk about shop. But just the timing of Steve Stevens finding me and just kind of take me under his wing, and he's still to this day like anything. Like, he's so generous as a person.
That is incredible. Steve Stevens is my all-time favorite guitar player, by the way. So I was like, you got to be kidding me. That's awesome. I mean, he is a dynamo of a musician and songwriter. It
Oh,
isn't just about the notes he's playing, it's about how he makes them count.
yeah.
He's such a prolific songwriter too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's not just about the technical ability, it's about the story that he conveys through the musical notes. And there's something that he does, I don't know what he does, but it's so unique, so tuneful, so melodic
Hmm.
that it just does something for me. And yeah,
Yeah.
he's one of the best, and incredible that a guitar player reached out to someone who was on TikTok for their singing ability, right? That's what you were doing on TikTok at the time?
Yeah.
It
Yeah. I
was
was,
just you weren't playing guitar, right? It was just specifically vocals that you were showcasing.
yeah, I had to figure that out. It's a good question because at the time I think I was showing that I was playing everything. Um, and that was a gimmick that I was doing for a while. I still do it from time to time, but at that moment, he thought that was killer because I would do, like a version of what was it? Well, really, it's like a version of a version. I think it's CCR when they did Susie Q. I remember doing, oh, it's a cool cover, and then was like covering them, but then kind of playing it in what I thought was like a Cream style and improvising. And so, but he watched the catalog that I had on there, and he obviously was he's very, like I said, he's generous in more ways than one, but he was very he always was celebrating like all the things that I did. He wasn't he could see the big picture, which is very sweet of him. But he was like, yeah, primarily looking at what I was doing vocally, and it was interesting because right around that time, like I said, I'd been out of it. I wasn't gigging, especially during the time I was chasing the acting scene. There were gigs, from time to time if I had bands, but they would fizzle out and do releases and be like, and then I'm not doing that anymore and whatever. So, like I said, the music was always there, but I wasn't really developing it or even vocally working on things in an intensive way until COVID happened when I started doing a lot of covers, started going back to the training, all of Katie Agresta's amazing exercises and that foundation strengthening, all that stuff. But then singing and then like, okay, well, what if I do this? What if I do that? And just getting back into that mindset. So it was kind of fortuitous that he was interested around that time because I don't think I sounded. I mean, you may get like, oh, Emmett, like he knows what he's doing as a singer, but I don't think my voice really showed up in a way until I was like 30. And that could have been from lack of doing it, but there's something that happens physically when you're like around that age. If you've treated your voice well, or you've got, and it keeps going, or you just have more power, more control to do more stuff, and so like finding out like, oh man, like really belting and like doing Zeppelin, and then you're like trying to take on a Audio Slave tune or Soundgarden, humbly, of course, but like trying to get that roughness and power out of the voice. And I was always obsessed, since I was little. Like I said, like Little Richard to me is kind of like, well, he's the first one to really do it. I think we're all chasing him vocally, like he has that just, sawed off shotgun sound. I think that everyone unconsciously too is probably either you know it or you don't know it, but you're still chasing it. And yeah, like all those things were starting to click a little bit more for me vocally, I think, at the time. So when Steve found me, it was like, and I was still working on stuff because I hear from that period while I was in the cover gig, I was the tenor we're one of them in the group. So they're like, well, you got to sing the high stuff over the lead singer. I was like, yeah, it's fine. But I was starting to play with how I was hitting those notes in new ways. And so it was like a great work, like a gym for me. Because it was like 5 shows a week, and like 3 45-minute sets usually. Um, and so anyway, it gave me a great chance to, put it all into focus and try things out. So, and at the same time, I was working the socials and trying to cover this and that. And so it was timing was really cool. And yeah, and so that's, a relationship that, even if it's just like, hey, Steve, what's good? I'm happy to have.